I never imagined my 35th birthday would become the night that shattered everything I thought I knew, and yet somehow the night that set me free. My name is Elise. I'm a woman who built her life around discipline appearances and the unspoken rule that survival in Boston's elite circles required silence. But silence had been killing me thread by thread, and on that night in front of chandeliers, senators, judges, and my husband's powerful family, I chose to laugh when I should have cried. That laugh became my weapon. The evening began long before the rooftop terrace and champagne glasses. It began in the shadows of my own home, where secrets whispered louder than words. I had woken that morning to James, my husband of 6 years, stepping out of the shower, steam trailing after him like a veil. His body was still magnificent at 37, but his eyes were empty, hollowed out by years of manipulation I had only recently come to understand. "Happy birthday, Elise," he murmured, his lips cold on my cheek. There was no warmth in his voice, no trace of the man I had once fallen in love with. I smiled anyway. I always smiled. That was the mask I had perfected. But behind it I was documenting everything: his vacant stares, the subtle changes in his tone, the way his mother's whispers could alter his entire demeanor in seconds. It wasn't love anymore. It was programming, a carefully constructed control I had pieced together like a lawyer dissecting a case. Victoria, my mother-in-law, was the true puppeteer. Elegant, ruthless, and adored by Boston society, she had built an empire on appearances. To the world, she was a grande dame, a philanthropist draped in Chanel and pearls. To me, she was a predator who had hollowed out her own son and attempted to mold me into another possession of the Harrington dynasty. She had installed cameras in our home under the guise of safety. I discovered them months ago, looping fake footage when I needed privacy. She thought she owned me. She thought she owned us all. That morning, I had checked the hidden compartment in my closet, the one place free of her eyes. Inside was my true arsenal: encrypted hard drives, burner phones, files I had been collecting for years. Evidence of fraud, bribery, offshore accounts, and most disturbingly, psychological manipulation, proof that James had been conditioned since he was a boy, broken down by so-called therapists, until he no longer knew where his will ended and his mother's began. For years I played the perfect wife, while building a case that would bring the Harrington empire crashing down. When Victoria texted me to wear the blue Valentino dress she had picked for me, I smiled coldly and slipped into crimson Dior instead. A small rebellion, but one that felt like armor. I was done obeying. That night the war would break open. The restaurant glowed like something out of a dream, glass walls, reflecting the harbor, chandeliers, suspended like stars. 50 of Boston's most powerful faces turned toward me, their smiles as polished as the silverware. Victoria glided forward, resplendent in midnight blue, embracing me with perfume-scented lips that whispered blue would have been better for the photographs. Her words slid across my skin like ice, but I answered with a smile as rehearsed as hers. I wanted to surprise everyone. Dinner was a performance. I played my role flawlessly, laughing in the right places, lifting my glass at the right times, all the while watching James, my husband, my stranger, move through the party like a sleepwalker. Across the table sat Dr. Whitley, the man who had been paid for years as James's therapist. I had the receipts that told the truth: $30,000 a month for behavioral maintenance. He watched me clinically as though I were part of his experiment. And then came the moment Victoria had orchestrated: the gifts. Tiffany boxes, diamond bracelets, expensive handbags, all symbols of ownership dressed as generosity. She stood at the head of the table, her hand tightening on James's shoulder like a signal. Her voice was smooth, commanding. 5 years ago, James brought home this brilliant, beautiful attorney, and she has been everything the Harrington family values. She raised her glass, her eyes gleaming. May this 35th year be transformative. It was a threat, though no one else heard it. And then James turned to me. His pupils contracted, his voice flattened as if a switch had been flipped. "You've betrayed us," he said. Gasps rippled through the guests. My heart thundered, but my face stayed calm. "What do you mean, James?" I asked, though I already knew. You've been working with the SEC. He continued, mechanically gathering files, leaking information. Every eye turned toward me. Victoria had wanted this moment, wanted me painted as a traitor in front of Boston's elite. And then it happened. His hand moved faster than I could register, and the slap cracked across my face, the sound echoing like a gunshot against marble and glass. I fell sideways, tasting blood, my vision swimming. Silence swallowed the terrace. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. They had all seen it. They had all heard it. The perfect Harrington image had fractured in an instant. Victoria opened her mouth to spin the narrative to paint me as unstable, but I did something she never predicted. I laughed. It started small, bubbling past my split lip, then grew sharp and clear, slicing through the silence. I pushed myself up, Dior, smeared with blood, and laughed harder, real unshaken laughter that made every phone still raised, still recording capture not my humiliation but my triumph. Perfect timing, Victoria, I said, my voice carrying across the stunned crowd. You couldn't have scripted it better yourself. And just like that, the trap she had set for me began to close around her instead. The laughter rattled something in the room, the chandelier crystals trembled, forks hovered midair. It rattled something in me, too, shaking loose the years of careful, suffocating quiet that had glued my mouth shut. I swiped the blood with the back of my hand, tasted iron, and lifted my chin as if the sting had knighted me. Cameras were still up. Good. Witnesses mattered in the Harrington world. You're right about one thing, I said, steady and bright, as if we were back to toasts. This evening was scripted. I tapped my wrist, and the cuff of my sleeve knocked the tiny transmitter hidden beneath my bracelet. Across the terrace, the screen that had been looping a slideshow of my childhood photos went black, then blinked to life with a new title, Harrington Family Foundation Internal Controls Review. There was a visible recoil, shoulders drawn back, spines stiffening in rows the way people brace when the ocean suddenly retreats. Victoria's smile faltered. Dr. Whitley's hand flew to his pocket, fishing for a phone that I already knew was in airplane mode, courtesy of the friendly AV manager I'd met the week before, the man whose mother coincidentally had lost her pension when a Harrington-backed fund went belly up. The first slide was dull on purpose, dates, balances a bland ledger. It lulled the room, baited them into thinking this was tedious. The second slide bared teeth payments to foreign shell entities with names pretty enough to pass for charities, all routed through the foundation. A ripple moved through the guests, a wind across tall grass. I heard an inhale from the senator at the corner table. The judge's jaw pulsed. This is slander, Victoria said, perfectly modulated, the voice of a woman who had turned lies into wallpaper. Our accountants were very expensive, I finished softly, and very careless. The third slide replaced her words' emails with her initials, toggling the rounding adjustment column timed to board meetings. The fourth slide wire transfers to an island bank I had grown familiar with at 2 a.m, peering through the fog of another night spent unlearning the script of obedience. James spoke, voice thin. Elise, stop. It wasn't a command, not yet. It sounded like a plea pushed through a throat that had forgotten how to ask. He was losing altitude. I could feel the hitch in his breathing from 3 feet away. Do you remember the first time you told me you were afraid of being ordinary? I asked. Not cruel, simply curious. You were 25. She was standing in the doorway. I didn't look at Victoria, but the screen did. The fifth slide, an invoice from Whitley's clinic, behavioral maintenance alignment sessions, schema reinforcement. I heard a small, strangled sound. It took me a moment to realize it came from me. Whitley rose halfway from his chair. This is protected therapy. It was conditioning, I said, and the word landed with the weight of a gavel. Monetized, directed, paid for by the woman who just watched her son hit his wife and thought the problem was my dress color. A murmur turned into a low storm. Phones no longer discreet were recording openly. I let the images wash the room, the checks to Whitley, the calendar entries that matched corporate votes, the times James apologized to donors who had mysteriously changed their positions after his appointments. And then the video, Whitley's voice. I had filtered it clean in the edits, rhythmic, coaxing, extracting confessions from a young man with a teenager's eyes and a grown man's suit. When you feel cornered, you assert. When you fear the loss of control, you act. If she threatens the family's order, you correct her. I reached for the stem of my glass, not to drink, but to steady my hand. "This isn't to excuse you," I said, keeping my eyes on James. "It's to label the tools used to build the person who raised his hand to me." He looked at the screen, then at me, and for the first time all evening I saw a flicker fear. Yes, but something else too. Recognition is a fragile bridge. You can't march across it, you tiptoe and hope it holds. Victoria recovered first. She always did. "You pathetic girl," she said, the mask slipping just enough to show bone. "You married above your breeding and thought you could turn on us. These are stolen files. You violated—" "The restraining order in my clutch was signed at 4 o'clock," I said lightly, as if sharing a recipe. "And the copies of everything you're watching were delivered to the Attorney General's office at 4:05. My favorite part. The bursar at Whitley's clinic helped notarize the affidavits. She's in the third row." Heads turned as a woman raised her hand, cheeks flushed but eyes clear. She was tired of watching boys be broken for stipends. It would have been enough already the party had turned from celebration to deposition. But betrayal is a hydra. Cut off one head and another rises, smelling like old secrets. I had planned to save it for a smaller room with fewer cameras. Sometimes life doesn't let you choose your stage. "James," I said softly, "there's one more thing you deserve to know from someone who loves you enough to stop lying." The word hung there, love's a bell tone in a stone courtyard. Your father did not leave you. A rustle, a thud of someone's glass on wood. He was removed, quietly. With paperwork Whitley drafted, and a doctor's note Victoria signed declaring him unfit after his stroke. "He wrote you letters. I found them in the safe." My breath snagged at the memory of the envelope's edges, yellowed hope preserved like pressed wildflowers. They were never mailed. For the first time, Victoria flinched. It was small, a ripple under velvet, but the room saw it. The screen obeyed the cue, a scanned image of the first letter, the salutation shaky but unmistakable. "My boy, my James." Gasps hopped from table to table like sparks. James stood without meaning to, as if the floor itself had risen. He looked from the letter to his mother, then to me, then back again, searching for a world where both could be true, and finding himself suspended over the chasm between them. "Why?" he whispered. One syllable threadbare. Victoria didn't answer. Rage had vacated her face. In its place was calculation, the old math: how many favors left, how many phones to confiscate, how to staunch a hemorrhage with charm. She reached for James's sleeve the way she'd done since he was a boy. He pulled back like he'd touched a stove. Security hovered at the edges. Half the guests were already texting people whose job it was to survive fallout. I let the last slide roll, a simple list of names and dates, an index, a map. It didn't need commentary. We were beyond persuasion now. The story had left our mouths and entered the bloodstream of a city that pretended to be too polite for scandal and fed on it every morning for breakfast. I felt the sting in my cheek blooming to a deep throb. I tasted blood again, and out of habit I couldn't scrub clean, check the room, who needed protecting, who could be hurt by the ricochet. The young server near the exit had tears bright as glass. The senator's wife had taken her hand. Somewhere beneath the crystal and the mahogany, a small good thing was happening. I turned back to the man I had married. "You can keep performing for her," I said, not unkind. "Or you can step down off that stage and become something no one here planned." He stared at me with the raw eyes of the boy in the video. The boy who learned that control felt like safety, and safety felt like love. For a heartbeat, everything folded into silence again. The kind that signals the end of one life and the start of another. Then the terrace erupted: questions, footsteps, the scrape of chairs, the thin wail of a siren threading up from the street. Somewhere in the noise, I laughed again, not the triumphant laugh this time, but a quieter one, a cracked thing full of grief and relief. The trap had sprung. Whether it would free him or finish him was no longer up to me. The sirens outside grew louder, a shrill hymn that fused with the chaos inside the restaurant. The guests no longer cared about the carefully arranged crystal or the $1,000 bottles of Bordeaux waiting to be poured. They were on their feet, Phones buzzing, some whispering, others openly recording. Power. The one thing the Harringtons clung to as tightly as breath was slipping from their hands, and everyone could see it. I stood in the center of it all, my cheek still burning from James's slap, my dress stained at the collarbone where a bead of blood had dried. Yet I was steadier than I had ever been. It felt like years of carrying weights had suddenly lifted, not because the burden was gone, but because I had finally dropped it for everyone to see. Victoria's voice cracked through the noise. "Shut this off! Everyone sit down!" Her command was sharper, less polished now. The Grande Dame mask was crumbling. She waved her manicured hand at the AV screen, but the manager, a quiet man with thinning hair, crossed his arms and shook his head. "It's automated," he said loudly for everyone to hear. "No one can stop it until the last file runs," and just like that her control fractured further. James swayed as though the floor was unstable beneath him. His eyes darted to the letter on the screen, then to me, then to the people now staring not at me, but at him. For years he'd been the polished golden boy, the obedient son, the successful attorney, the handsome husband at my side. Now he was exposed, stripped of script, and his breathing turned jagged. "Tell me it isn't true," he whispered, not to me but to her. Victoria's lips trembled once before she pressed them tight. For the first time since I had known her, she had no words ready. That silence was louder than any confession. James staggered back, catching himself on the edge of the table. His friends reached out but didn't touch. Loyalty in this world was transactional, and they were already recalculating their odds. The police arrived, uniforms cutting through the crowd, asking questions, trying to restore order. I raised my hands calmly, explaining that I was fine, though my cheek ached and pulsed with the outline of James's fingers. Fine was a lie, but it was one I knew how to tell. The officer asked if I wanted to press charges. I looked at James, pale, trembling, his mother's hand hovering near his sleeve like a leash about to snap. "Not tonight," I said softly. "Tonight is about truth, not punishment." The officer nodded, but the look in his eyes told me he'd already logged the incident. My laugh, my bruised face, the recordings on dozens of phones, those were evidence enough. Victoria tried one last time. She swept forward, her pearls gleaming like weapons, and hissed, "Do you understand what you've done? You've destroyed us all." "Us." "No," I answered, locking eyes with her. "I've freed us. You just don't know it yet." The screen flickered to black, and silence flooded back in. No one clapped. No one toasted. They simply stared the way people stare at a storm that has passed but left their windows shattered. I gathered my clutch, my dignity stitched together by blood and laughter, and walked toward the exit. Every step echoed like a gavel strike. James didn't follow me. He couldn't. His body leaned toward me, but Victoria's shadow pinned him in place. Perhaps one day he'd break free. Perhaps not. Either way, my path no longer depended on his. Outside, the cold Boston air sliced against my skin, but it felt purifying. My driver opened the car door, and I slid inside, watching as the restaurant loomed behind me, a glass fortress cracking from the inside out. As the car pulled away, my phone buzzed. Messages poured in, journalists, colleagues, strangers, who had seen fragments already hitting social media. My laugh, the slap, the files all looping in 15-second clips that would ignite the city by morning. The Harrington name, once untouchable, was trending in a storm of scandal. I pressed my cheek against the cool leather seat and let my eyes close. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, what welled up was grief. Grief for the years stolen, for the love I thought I had for the boy James had once been, before his mother hollowed him out. My tears came hot, silent, soaking the fabric of my dress. But unlike the tears he and his mother had bet on, these were not of defeat, they were of release. For the first time in years, I felt alive. The morning after the world was different. Not because the sun rose any brighter, but because truth once buried for decades had clawed its way into daylight. My phone hadn't stopped vibrating since dawn. Headlines screamed across every platform: Harrington scandal erupts at birthday gala. The slap was on repeat. My face, his hand, the aftermath frozen into an image Boston society would never forget. But just beneath it all, were the leaks, the files I had painstakingly collected. They were now public record, a wildfire no one could contain. I sat by the window of my apartment, not the mansion that had been more cage than home, and wrapped my hands around a mug of coffee gone cold. The bruise on my cheek had darkened to a violet bloom stark against my skin, but I didn't try to hide it. Every time I caught my reflection, I reminded myself it wasn't a mark of shame. It was proof of survival. A soft knock came at the door. When I opened it, my best friend Mara stood there, eyes wide, arms full of groceries. She didn't speak at first. She just hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "You did it," she whispered finally. "You finally did it." I wanted to tell her I didn't feel victorious, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I let myself lean into her warmth. She didn't ask questions about the files, the years of secrets, or the way I had chosen laughter over tears. She just placed the groceries on my counter and busied herself in the kitchen, as if restoring a sliver of normalcy was the only gift she could give. But the world outside was anything but normal. By noon, Victoria's face filled every news channel. Her carefully cultivated image, philanthropist, queen of society, was unraveling live. Federal agents had visited the foundation headquarters that morning. Whitley's clinic was under investigation, its patients' files seized. There were whispers of arrests coming. And James was silent. I didn't expect him to call. Yet when my phone buzzed in the late afternoon, his name lit the screen. My chest tightened. Against my better judgment, I answered, "Elise." His voice was raw, stripped of the polish he wore like a second skin. For a moment, I heard the boy from the video trembling under a therapist's voice. I don't know what's real anymore." I closed my eyes, leaning against the wall. "That's the first honest thing you've said in years." "I didn't want to hit you," he choked out. "It was like I wasn't even me. She told me." His voice cracked, and I swallowed the ache rising in my throat. "James!" "I know," I whispered. "But knowing doesn't undo it. You have to decide who you want to be when her voice isn't in your head anymore." Silence stretched. Then he said the words I never expected. "Can you forgive me?" Tears burned hot at the corners of my eyes. I wanted to scream at him, to pour out the years of betrayal, the loneliness, the humiliation. Instead, I let the quiet linger before answering. "Forgiveness isn't a gift I can hand you today. Maybe not ever. But you can forgive yourself. That's where it starts." He exhaled, shaky and broken. "She's finished," he muttered. "They're coming for her. And without her, I don't know who I am." I wanted to tell him he was free, that he could finally build a life of his own. But freedom isn't something you hand to someone. It's something they have to claim. "Find out," I said softly. "For once in your life, find out." And then I ended the call. That night, I walked alone along the Charles River. The city lights shimmered on the water, fractured and beautiful, just like my life. Strangers passed me, some recognizing my face, some whispering my name. But I didn't flinch. I wasn't hiding anymore. I thought of my father, long gone now, but who used to tell me, "Truth is heavy, Elise, but it's the only thing worth carrying." For years I carried silence, fear, the weight of their control. And now finally I was carrying only truth. It hurt, yes. It cost me everything I thought I wanted. But it gave me back myself. And that was enough. Days turned into weeks, and the scandal rippled outward like stones cast into a still pond. Each day brought another headline, another revelation. Bank accounts frozen, board members resigning, former allies of the Harringtons suddenly claiming ignorance, distancing themselves in public statements. The mighty dynasty was collapsing, not with a single blow, but with 1,000 fractures spreading faster than anyone could mend. I watched it all from a distance, not as the frightened wife hiding behind a smile, but as a woman who had chosen exposure over silence. And yet inside me there was still a gnawing ache. Justice had been set in motion, but justice doesn't heal the bruises of the soul. It doesn't give back the years spent performing obedience or erase the sting of a hand across your face in front of everyone you once called family. One evening, Mara and I sat on my couch, the television flickering, with yet another news panel dissecting the Harrington downfall. "They're calling you fearless," she said, handing me a glass of wine. "A hero for standing up." I laughed, but it wasn't triumphant. It was hollow. Fearless Mara, I was terrified. Every second. I still am. She squeezed my hand. "That's what makes it bravery." I thought about that as I lay awake later that night. Bravery had cost me love, or at least the illusion of it. I still saw James in my dreams sometimes as the hollow-eyed man he had become sometimes, as the young man who once held me at a street corner in the rain and whispered promises that felt unbreakable. I mourned him even as I condemned him. Both could be true. The letters from his father became my unexpected anchor. After the gala, I had retrieved them from the safe and read them one by one. His handwriting grew shakier with each, but the love for his son never dimmed. "My boy, my James. Don't let them make you cold. Don't let them take the softness from you." I wept over those words. They weren't written for me, but somehow they felt like they were. Then came the subpoena. I had known it was inevitable, but seeing my name on official letterhead still sent a shiver down my spine. I was to testify against the Harringtons and Whitley in court. My evidence had sparked the fire, but now I would have to walk into the blaze. On the morning of the hearing, I stood in front of the mirror adjusting the collar of a simple navy suit. The bruise on my cheek had faded to yellow, but I still traced its ghost with my fingers. This time, though, I wasn't trying to cover it. It reminded me of why I was walking into that courtroom. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Journalists lined the back pens, scratching cameras flashing when allowed. Victoria sat at the defense table, her pearls gone, her posture still regal but brittle. She looked at me once, and in her eyes I saw not regret but hatred sharp enough to cut glass. She still believed she could win, that she could spin this into another chapter of her empire. And then there was James. He sat apart, summoned as a witness, but not yet called. His face was pale drawn, as though he hadn't slept in weeks. Our eyes met briefly, and in that moment, I saw a flicker, not the puppet, not the betrayer, but the boy who once scribbled poems on napkins and left them by my bedside. It nearly broke me. When I was called to the stand, I steadied my voice. I told the truth not just about the documents, the payments, the manipulation, but about the toll it had taken. I spoke of the hidden cameras, the forced therapy the night of my birthday, when my husband's hand collided with my face. The room was silent, every word hanging in the air like a blade. And when the defense tried to paint me as vindictive, I didn't falter. "If speaking the truth makes me vindictive," I said, "then perhaps vindictiveness is another word for survival." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge's gavel struck, calling for order. But the words had already landed, and I felt something inside me uncoil. For once, I wasn't just surviving. I was standing unshaken in the center of my own story. That night, when I returned home, the city felt quieter. The air was sharp with winter, but I drew it into my lungs like it was the first breath of my life. Mara was waiting for me, and she smiled when she saw me. "It's done," she said softly. "Not yet," I replied, "but it's beginning." Because healing, I realized, isn't a single act. It's 1,000 small ones, the laugh that shatters silence, the bruise that fades but never disappears, the truth spoken even when your voice trembles. And though the Harrington name would forever be tangled with betrayal and pain, my name, Elise, would no longer be synonymous with silence. Weeks stretched into months, and the trial unfolded like a slow dissection of the Harrington legacy. Every day more skeletons were dragged into the light. Offshore accounts, coerced signatures, false philanthropy, all of it painted in black and white across courtroom screens. The dynasty that once held Boston in its grip was unraveling strand by strand, and I was both witness and catalyst. The media branded me with names I never asked for: whistleblower, survivor, heroine. Some saw strength in my laughter, others framed it as spectacle. But only I knew the truth, that laughter wasn't victory. It was defiance in the face of humiliation, a refusal to give them the tears they had wagered on. Still, in the quiet moments, I grieved. I grieved for the years stolen, for the illusions I had clung to, for the boy James had been before he was broken into obedience. Sometimes I would sit by the river with the letters from his father folded in my lap, and I would wonder if things might have been different had those words reached him when he needed them most. Then came the day James took the stand. The courtroom was hushed, the air so taut it felt like it could snap. He walked slowly, shoulders hunched, a man, bearing not just the weight of his mother's empire, but the wreckage of his own choices. His voice shook at first. He admitted to actions done under Victoria's guidance, to votes swayed to words not his own. The defense tried to object, but James pressed on as though something inside him had finally cracked open. My wife, he said, his eyes flickering toward me, was right. About all of it. And his throat worked. I betrayed her in every way a man can betray a woman. But I need you to understand, I didn't even know who I was anymore. My mother, she carved me hollow and filled me with her will. But Elise, he stopped, his voice breaking. She was the only truth I ever had, and I destroyed it. Gasps rippled through the room. Victoria's face blanched, her jaw tightening like stone. For once, her power did not reach far enough to silence her own son. I didn't cry. Not then. I held myself still, every nerve taut, because part of me wanted to believe him, and part of me knew that belief would be a dangerous indulgence. Forgiveness was not a ribbon I could tie over wounds that deep. The judge thanked him, dismissed him, and James stepped down, his eyes searching mine for something I couldn't give. I looked away. The verdict, when it came weeks later, was inevitable. Guilty on multiple counts, assets seized, sentences handed down that would echo through Boston's corridors of wealth for generations. The Harrington name was no longer one of prestige but of scandal. Victoria was led away in handcuffs, her pearls replaced by the cold glint of steel. Afterward, reporters swarmed, microphones shoved toward me, voices clamoring for a statement. I paused, the cold air biting at my skin, and finally said, "The truth costs. It always costs. But silence costs more." Then I walked away, leaving their cameras to feed on the soundbite. Life after was quieter, though never the same. Strangers stopped me on the street to thank me, or to ask for selfies, or to tell me their own stories of betrayal and survival. Some nights I lay awake, haunted by echoes of laughter and slaps, by the sharp smell of champagne and blood. Healing wasn't linear. It was jagged, like glass shards slowly dulling with time. But there were mornings too. Mornings where I woke up to sunlight spilling across my bed, no cameras watching, no expectations pressing on my chest. Mornings where I made coffee for myself alone and felt that strange, miraculous thing, peace. One evening, months after the trial, I walked the Charles River again. The water shimmered, fractured light dancing just as it had that night when I first laughed instead of cried. A young woman approached me, her hands trembling as she said, "I saw what you did." It gave me the courage to leave him. "Thank you." Her words settled in my chest, warm and heavy. For the first time, I understood that my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every woman who had been silenced, every survivor who needed to see that laughter could be sharper than any blade. I went home, sat at my desk, and began writing. Not legal briefs, not affidavits, my story. The whole truth, messy and unpolished, because maybe, just maybe, it could help someone else carry their own heavy truth until it set them free. And in that act, I realized something simple and profound. Revenge had brought justice, but it was truth that had given me back myself. So if you've listened this far, if you've walked through the fire of this story with me, I want you to take one thing with you: silence is never protection. Your voice, no matter how cracked, no matter how trembling, can break empires. Thank you for hearing mine. Please like, share, and subscribe. If this story has moved you, and tell me in the comments, what truth have you been waiting to speak?